right.
Right on time.
So let's finish up the back. Just one note, when our little issues with the trapezius. So trapezius action is the lateral rotation of the scapula during upper limb abduction. So when you're raising your upper arm, the scapula is kind of leaning out this way. That leaning out is what the trapezius is actually doing. So some clarification there. Yes, so trapezius action is lateral rotation of the scapula during upper limb abduction. AV, abduction, taking it away from the body. Okay, did everybody get that? Awesome. All right, so let's finish up talking about the back. I think I'm safe to unplug this for now. So then we've gotten through the vertebral column, the musculature. Now let's talk about the spinal cord and what's going on in that. So a spinal cord is a continuation of the brain stem coming down through the vertebral canal, and just overall spinal cord morphology. So we have here, it's a kind of circular to ovoid shaped structure. We have two fissures. We have the anterior median fissure here at the midline on the anterior side, the posterior median sulcus, the same location on the posterior side. And those are locations often where blood vessels will infiltrate into the center of the spinal cord. We also have the posterior lateral sulcus here, and that's this groove. It's this color, this groove right here, along where the little rootlets come out of the spinal cord. So that.
So is there an anterior?
Yes, there's anterior and posterior.
Lateral sulcus.
Yeah, we're only going to talk about the posterior lateral sulcus, but you can see that there is a sulcus in the anterior side as well. Okay. Then in the interior of the spinal cord, so we have two different sections. We have gray matter, and that's composed of what?
Gray matter?
Unmyelinated.
Cell
bodies.
Yep, cell bodies and unmyelinated axons. So this is a lot of interneurons. And a lot of the processing happens in there. Okay, and then white matter is the myelinated axons. Yep. All right, good. And so then, just kind of going back to what we've talked about with spinal cord lesions, when you get problems below the site of injury, it's because we have the myelinated axons in the white matter that are descending and ascending the spinal cord. When those are damaged, that's when we have problems below the site of injury. So remember, these are ascending and descending tracts. Okay, I gotta get rid of that color. Okay, and then also we have the central canal up here.
Can we turn off that front light?
Can you? Yeah, do it. I don't know how to turn it off. Someone else will have to take care of that. Show me how. Oh, got it.
One of them is, there you go.
There we go. Is that better?
Oh, that's better.
You can see. Okay,
Yeah.
So the central canal here, this is, was originally the interior of the neural tube, and now is a canal that is filled with cerebral spinal fluid, which allows for nutrient distribution and waste removal in the interior of the spinal cord. Okay, so everybody got all those notes, or do you need a second to catch up with the lab situation? Okay, take it. I will ingest more caffeine. Right now, I'm running on caffeine and chocolate.
Oh, that's a good combo.
I thought so. Okay. Yes,
Just
question?
a question about the ascending and descending tracks.
Uh-huh.
So if there's a lesion on one of the levels, you said that there could be issues above or below just because of those tracks?
Typically, you'll find loss of sensation or loss of function below the lesion. So that is problems with information going up past the lesion and going down past the lesion. Yeah.
If there's problems going up and down though, why is it typically seen more often below? Why is the ability to go up?
Right. So you when you have ascending tracks, they are predominantly sensory. So you're gonna have loss of feeling below the lesion. So it's going to feel like below the lesion, even though the ascending tracks are what is interrupted. And then the descending tracks are motor, so you'll have motor deficits below because that information is not getting through. There are some local spinal circuits that go up and down in shorter segments of the white matter tracts, but that gets into more localized issues after the injury, which we don't have time to get into. Okay, good. Any other questions? We all caught up with this slide? Okay. Alright, so then we look at the big picture of the spinal cord. We see it running down almost the whole length of the spinal column, but not quite. So it ends about the level of the L2 or L1 vertebrae right there. And beyond that, we have a mass of spinal nerves, I'm going to attempt to draw in here, coming down through here. And that is called what? Does anybody know? That bundle of spinal cord.
Cauda equina.
Cauda equina. Cauda equina. What do you think cauda equina means?
Horse.
Horse's tail, yeah. Which is kind of what it looks like. Love the description, it's great. Okay. We also have enlargements here, the cervical region and the lumbosacral region of the spinal cord. And any idea of why we have enlargements there?
Horns.
Hmm?
Horns coming out of it. Control the lid.
Yeah, so those are the areas that control the upper and lower limbs. So cervical obviously is upper limb. So you've got a ton of innervation to the upper limb, lots of processing going on in the spinal cord in those areas, so just needs a little extra space. Good, and then what I just totally messed up here, so let me get a different color and redraw it. There we go. There's a filament that runs all the way down here along there. This is the filum terminale. And it is basically a connective tissue filament that goes from the tip of the spinal cord down to the posterior aspect of the coccyx. And that helps anchor the spinal cord at the bottom of the spinal column. And it is covered in dura mater and some parts of it with some pia mater as well. But just no filum terminale. I think I got the definitions of the pilial part and the dural part in my notes, unless I wrote them in afterwards, because I forgot to. Let me see. Yeah, I wrote them in afterwards. So yeah, just no filum terminale is good enough.
So we don't have to know the peel.
You don't need to know the definitions for the peel and dural parts. Whatever. More detail than we need. More detail than will be useful to you. And then finally we have the conus medullaris here, and that's just that cone-shaped end to the spinal cord.
I guess are there ever any problems with that filum terminale cord getting like broken or ruptured? Or?
I've never heard of a syndrome with that. I imagine it would be possible in an injury when you have fracture of those lower vertebrae.
Yeah.
That would be a problem because you'd have shifting the spinal cord up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's usual or not. I mean, I've never heard of it, but
I've never heard of a specific syndrome. So it probably, if you get to the point where you damage your lumbar and sacral spine that badly, that's probably the least of your worries. You've probably got a whole lot of other things that's going on real bad.
probably, yeah.
Okay, but it's totally possible. Absolutely. Okay. So then, inside the vertebral column, so let's just take a section of the cord again. We have protection for the spinal cord, so we have, you see the spinal cord in the middle there. And then we have 3 layers of meninges, like we talked about. We have the pia mater, and do you remember which one that is?
The innermost.
It's the innermost, yeah. It is tightly adhered to the surface of the spinal cord, and it is vascularized. And if that works better. Sorry? Adheres to the spinal cord, Ken. Man, when I put my elbows down, I write a lot better. That's great. Okay,
So
then,
those vessels, they are technically in the pia mater. Are those 3 big vessels?
it looks like they are from the diagram. I don't know for sure, but
Okay.
I would imagine since they're supplying it, they would be penetrating through the pia mater.
Okay.
Yeah. Then there are these lateral extensions of the pia mater here, and they form this kind of triangular sections of the pia mater. It's called the denticulate ligament. They attach to the dura mater on the edges of the spinal, or the vertebral canal, and they're on both sides, obviously. So here's on the other side. And any ideas why that would exist? What would that be doing?
Channeling CSF, maybe? I don't know.
Okay, so they're
Creating structure.
Anchoring
pardon?
Creating more structure, and then anchoring the spinal column in the middle of the
Mhm.
the yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
so it's basically the anchor holding the spinal column, or the spinal cord in the middle of that vertebral canal, so it doesn't keep bouncing off either side of the vertebral canal. So,
And you said that's an extension of the pia mater?
it is. So centers, spinal cord, I'll abbreviate that SC. And maybe try to write it so it's legible. Okay, good. And then we also have sheaths of pia mater that are around each of these spinal rootlets here. So more pia mater to protect it from the cerebral spinal fluid as it exits. Different color? Sure.
What is?
And can you
Huh?
point that out again? It's just hard to see.
It is hard to see, so let me try a different color. So here, is that better?
Oh, yes.
Okay, right along the spinal rootlets there, those are sheathed in pia mater, again, giving them protection from the CS, but barrier between the CSF and the nervous tissue.
And what is those called?
It's just these little guys right here are the nerve rootlets. Yeah, we'll talk about them more in a minute. Good. Then we have the arachnoid mater here, and that is adhered to the inside of the dura mater, which is the outermost, loosely adhered to it. And then the dura mater is tightly adhered to the inside of the spinal column, or the vertebral column. So all those ligaments and vertebral bodies and all that line the vertebral canal, that dura mater is adhered to that. And then between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, we have the subarachnoid space, and that is the area filled with cerebral spinal fluid. I gotta change color again, that's terrible. I'm like, here we go, flip around. And also has arachnoid trabeculae. Which are little filaments that connect, draw there to those little filaments that connect the pia mater and the subarachnoid mater, kind of just as a stabilization of that space. So those are the meninges protecting the spinal cord.
What did you say the arachnoid trabeculae connects?
They're little filaments connecting the pia mater to the arachnoid mater, crossing that subarachnoid space. have some sort of blood supply. So here's the vasculature. I'll point out several different really important vessels. We have coming off of the, where is it? There we go, vertebral artery here. So remember the vertebral artery, not to destroy the writing, there we go, is a branch of, make sure I remember the branches off of.
Your spinal artery.
Yes, it's the segmental spinal arteries. And so the vertebral artery is traveling up here and gets up to the cranial cavity, and you can see these little branches here. So it's little V-shaped branches coming down towards the spinal cord again, and that is the roots of the anterior spinal artery, which runs right along the anterior midline of the spinal cord. We also have other little branches, which are here and here, that are the roots of the posterior spinal artery. So there's two of those running down the posterior aspect of the spinal cord, and I have an image to show that in a moment. So that is the main, those are the main longitudinal arteries. So these two and this one are the longitudinal.
Your black line on the left side might be left.
Sorry?
The black line on the that you drew up, that's the vertebral artery.
Yes,
that
that's
you're just,
vertebral
but it's
artery.
actually the big main red one that's
Yes.
there? Okay.
And the vertebral artery is that, can you repeat how that's
Sorry?
kind of confusing?
Oh, the vertebral artery.
What it transitions into?
So the vertebral artery goes up to the cranial cavity, and then right here, there's two branches that come in. Kind of hard to see it, but you can see these two branches kind of curving in towards the center of the
Yeah.
spinal cord area. Those are coming down into the anterior spinal artery. And then the other two smaller branches that I circled in red or pink or whatever this color is, branching and going out behind the spinal cord are the roots of the posterior spinal arteries. So this is a figure from your book, so probably easiest to go look at that to get a better, closer up view, because it's obviously a little hard to see here. Okay, so those are the main longitudinal ones running up and down the spinal cord, and they're sending smaller vessels deeper into the spinal cord. And then we also have lots of feeder arteries coming in segmentally into the spinal cord area, and they usually pass in through the intervertebral foramina. There we go. So coming in from segmental arteries outside of the vertebral canal. And those would include the segmental medullary arteries. Where did they go? Here we go. They're branched from the segmental spinal artery, and we'll get a closer up picture there of that. But I just wanted to show you here, they're coming in at multiple levels along the spinal cord. And then we have additional segmental spinal arteries that we will cover in the next slide. Another important branch is the artery of Adamkiewicz. I don't know if I'm saying that properly. It's a branch from the segmental spinal artery, a big branch that comes off of those and usually travels down the left side of the spinal cord, and is important for supply to the lumbosacral enlargement. Okay, so that's the overview of our arterial supply. So then, yes, question.
So the segmental medullary arteries are only unilateral, but on the left side.
I believe they come in on both sides, they just
Just the-
illustrated
Just
on one
the
side. Mhm.
Artery of the Danquist is on the left.
Yeah.
Yes, that, the, this is the only one that's limited to one side. Any
Which one's
question,
limited?
any others? Sorry,
Artery of the Danquist.
how do you say it?
Adamkowitz.
Adamkowitz?
That's what I've always heard.
That sounds better than what I said. Those types of words, I was having trouble with. I was saying it in my office going, no, that doesn't sound right. Question?
So do you want us to make sure to know both the longitudinal and the segmental? Are those the main things that you're wanting us to know from this? Or do you want us to
You
know?
need to know all of these main arteries that I'm pointing out, because they are the main blood supply for the spinal cord, so you need to know anterior and posterior spinal arteries, that they're branches off of the vertebral artery. And then we'll talk, you have to know the artery of Adamkowitz, and then we'll talk about some of these segmental arteries more in a minute. You need to know all of those names too. Okay, so then, come on, let's go forward. There we go. Here's a better picture of some of these segmental arteries. So we have the intercostal, posterior intercostal arteries coming off of the aorta, and a small branch, the posterior branch, comes off, and one of the branches off that posterior branch is the segmental spinal artery. You can see it here on this side as well. And then the segmental medullary artery is the first branch off of that segmental spinal artery, and comes in here along the anterior roots to feed into the anterior spinal artery. Yep, we can change the color. What color? Let's do green. Green would be a good contrast. So here the segmental medullary artery coming in, feeding into the anterior spinal artery. We also have the posterior and anterior radicular arteries, and they are further branches off of this segmental spinal artery here and here, and also they're traveling along the spinal cord rootlets, this time along the posterior rootlets feed into the posterior spinal arteries. And you can see here are the posterior spinal arteries illustrated here, right next to the spinal rootlets on the posterior aspect of the spinal cord. So, yeah, no, all of the arteries shown here. Okay, questions about this? Pretty clear, clear as mud? We good? Okay. So here's the venous draining of the blood supply here. So we've got two major veins that we'll know. We want to know the posterior spinal vein that runs along the midline, posterior midline, so that posterior medial, what's the word? Sulcus, thank you. Wow, I'm having trouble with my words today. You just heard me in my 9 o'clock class. That was before the caffeine. Oh, bad, very bad. Then we have the anterior spinal vein that runs along the midline, right next to the anterior fissure, medial fissure. Now these two drain into the intervertebral plexus, which is a network of veins in the extradural space. You can see they're embedded in the extradural fat. And then they then drain segmentally into veins that then feed into the major systemic veins of the body, including like the zygos. So, let's try that again. Okay, so those are the only three major veins I want you to know. So anterior spinal vein, posterior spinal vein, and then internal vertebral plexus then drains segmentally eventually into the big systemic veins of the body. And when we get into like the thorax and abdomen, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about them. Yes.
When you say like segmentally, it just means like which level drains into their.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's lots of veins headed out at several different levels of the spinal cord. Very good. All right. So then let's kind of take that a step back and see how it's all packed together, including the muscles and everything. So we got our vertebral column providing the main support right here. Here we see, this is a lumbar view, so we have the cauda equina inside the meninges here in the vertebral canal. That is then surrounded by the extradural space with all of the internal vertebral plexus there surrounding it, so here. And then outside of that, we have the ligaments lining the vertebral canal. So next layer out, let's change to a different color for that. We have the posterior longitudinal ligament lining the interior aspect of it. The ligamenta flava, here they are, lining the posterior aspect of it. And the sides of the vertebral canals. We have the intervertebral foramen. Yeah, that's. I'm trying to get the plural one out. Foramina. There we go. Wow. Foramina, where we have the exiting spinal nerves there. And then you see our rector spinae muscles. You know, one more layer out. Let's do blue. Rector spinae muscles here, kind of nestled in alongside the spinous processes of the vertebra. We've got the more superficial layers of muscles coming in via their tendons to attach to the more distal portion of the spinous processes. So you can see how it's all packed in together. And so the biggest thing with looking at this region is just kind of taking all these pieces that we've studied and putting them together in one big picture. And so hopefully this diagram helps start you on that process.
For the testing of identifying different parts, is there maybe like a picture like this and kind of like your quiz where you have like the blanks?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very often will be something like that. So identifying something on a diagram where everything is very clearly distinguished.
That's no, it's
Okay.
more of a, like a hip muscle.
So then, along the spinal cord, we have segmentation, like I was talking about. So here we have our cervical enlargement, our lumbosacral enlargement, the cauda equina here. And you can see at each, with this diagram of the spinal cord, we have numbered segments all the way down. So those segments are partitioned by the locations of the spinal rootlets that come out of it. So here you can see this segment here has all of these rootlets coming into what would end up being the C2 spinal nerve. So coming out through here. So that is then a functional segment of the spinal cord from there to there-ish. So all of the processing is happening in that area of the spinal cord. The input and output is it coming via that C2 spinal nerve there. Some just things to point out as far as anatomical interest. So we have 8 cranial nerves here, 1 through 8. C1 through 7 come out above the respective vertebra. So C1 through C7 above vertebra. And then C8 comes out between C7, W in between. There we go. C7 and T1. And then thereafter, so from the T1 all the way down, the rest of the way, they emerge below their vertebra. That has the same name. Okay. Okay, so that's just, when we're talking about those dermatomyotones and how that correlates with the vertebral number, we need to make sure, remember that we have this extra C8 that, changes the order of where the, spinal nerves emerge. I also have the spinal ganglia, which are located typically within the intervertebral foramina. So it makes it a little more difficult to dissect it out because they're kind of hidden back in there. So here, this is showing the C8 emerging inferior to C7, and here indicating T1 through the coccygeal nerve emerging below the pedicles. A little easier to read than my writing. So, any questions about segmentation of the spinal cord? All right. So then, this segmentation leads to some interesting patterns of some syndromes. So this is herpes zoster. It's caused by the same virus that causes chickenpox. So that is the varicella zoster virus. And so when a child gets chickenpox, or I guess anybody can, but typically it's during childhood, you get the rashes all over the body, all of that. And then this virus becomes dormant and usually hangs out in these dorsal root ganglia right here, or the posterior spinal ganglia. And can hang out there for any number of years. When it becomes reactivated, it migrates down the nerves bundles and travels to the dermatome for that nerve and causes a painful rash. And this is shingles. And so depending on the nerve that is infected with the virus, you have patches corresponding to those dermatomes. You can see here some of the common sites of shingles rashes. So that's herpes zoster, the technical term for shingles. Question? Yeah.
Where did you say the virus is dormant?
In these posterior spinal ganglia, also called the dorsal root ganglia. Dorsal root ganglia is a term we use a lot more often in the scientific world instead of the clinical world. So, but you might talk to a researcher someday. Yeah.
Do you know why it's like always unilateral? Why it's always on one side of the body?
I don't think it has to be limited to it. I think this is just showing for clarity's sake. But I have no reason to think that it would be restricted unilaterally. As long as it's in a dorsal root ganglion, I don't think it really cares. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So that is the spinal cord. Now, last section, what we have to talk about is just some surface anatomy and how we use surface anatomy to orient ourselves to vertebral levels and, on the patient. So, a couple of them that are easy. So, the C7 vertebral spinous process is a very prominent process. You can feel it right at the base of your neck. That's the first prominent spinous process, and you can also feel the T1 vertebral spinous process just below it, so that helps you orient in that location. Here's another picture that shows them well. So here's C7 and T1 here, and then in some individuals you can also see further down as well. You also can see in the midline of the back, there's the nuchal groove. So there's just that groove in the back of the neck. So that's where the nuchal ligament, or ligamentum nuchae, runs, attaches there. So you have a groove there. And then in some individuals, you also can see some of these lower processes as well. But in case those aren't terribly prominent, You can also use other landmarks to figure them out.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can use the location of the spine of the scapula, so that's that root there, so this medial edge of the scapular spine. It's always about the same level as the T3 vertebral spinous process. The inferior angle of the scapula, so this bottom area, is approximately the same level as the T7 vertebral spinous process. And then if you go down to the iliac crest, so this highest point of the iliac crest, that is about the same level as L4 vertebral spinous process. And if you want to know where T12 is, so that last vertebral spinous process, is about halfway between the inferior angle of the scapula and the highest point of the iliac crest, so right about there. Now, something to note for the thoracic spinous processes, so in those vertebrae, the spinous process drops down from the vertebral body very sharply, so that the spinous process is actually the same level as the vertebral body down lower. So, this is, say, like a T1, T2. Okay, in the lumbar vertebrae, you have shorter, more, less angled spinous process, so like L1, L2. So the spinous process is approximately the same level as the vertebra. So here's this spinous process. So that's important to remember when using these skeletal landmarks. All right, you can also see or palpate the tip of the coccyx, the tip of the tailbone, and then the sacral dimples are on either side of approximately the S2 vertebral spinous process. Okay, any questions? So then, some of those spinous process locations are important for remembering where the spinal cord is. So, the S2 spinous process, right between the sacral dimples, so here and here, it's approximately where you have the end of the subarachnoid space, so the end of where you could actually pull out the sample of cerebral spinal fluid. And then about halfway between this location, so S2, and the T12 spinous processes, so about between L1 and L2 is where we have the end of the actual spinal cord itself, the conus medullaris there. And then you can use these landmarks to help you find the L4 vertebral spinous process, which is important for lumbar punctures, because that's approximately where we do it. So here you can see sacral dimples here on either side of the spine. Oops, can't see well enough, so that's the end of the arachnoid matter in the subarachnoid space. And then we can find the T12. Remember, let's jump back to that slide for a second. There we go, about halfway between the inferior angle of the scapula and the iliac crest. So we can find that location. And go back here. And so then we can move laterally between those two to find approximately the gap between the L4 and L5 vertebral spinous processes, which is where they would insert the needle. You can see here they're inserting it right through between the spinous processes through the supraspinous ligament into that subarachnoid space. And it's typically between L3 or L4 and L4 and L5 that they would do that. And that would be either for spinal tap, getting cerebral spinal fluid sample, that's what we're looking for, or injecting like an epidural anesthesia. If they go in just a little bit less deeply, so they don't penetrate the epidural space. They just go into the extradural space. You can do an extradural anesthesia. That acts just a little differently than the epidural. Okay, so that is it for today. Any questions? All right, so a couple of notes on lab. So tomorrow we're finishing up the thorax. We're going to break into smaller groups. From feedback I've heard, it sounds like the 15 people around the cadaver is a little much, so let's just do somewhere around 10 or fewer people, and we can just do more rounds of it. So, yeah, you can do groups of 5, whatever works. I'm open to whatever. And you just have to ask Cassandra how many times she wants to say the stuff, because she's leading out in the cadaver demonstrations this week. So she'll be taking charge on that, and I'll just be floating, being here to answer questions. I got notification that the TA who put together some of the videos I had posted online wasn't so comfortable with me sharing them. They didn't tell me that ahead of time, so I apologize for posting those. I'm making my own videos, so we'll continue to post ones. If you guys want to take videos, I can post them. You guys can't disseminate them, but I can, so just send them to me or somehow get them. Yeah.
The one I gave you to post.
Yeah.
It doesn't show.
It doesn't show?
No, yeah. I can't see it, and no one's been able to
Really?
see it.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have to change the setting to show it.
It must have gone in with a weird setting, so I will change that. I'll fix that right now.
Possible just you and Cassandra go through, you video it and.
That is my plan.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be very helpful.
Yeah, so I
We're not in there
will
talking or
generate
anything.
my own videos so that I have permission to use them. And hopefully they'll have everything.
Will either of you be here early, like if we're just
Yeah,
done
if
with
you can come, if
class?
you want to come to lab early and start studying,
Because they're probably like, oh, what if I do
Yeah.
something
All right, see you guys
stupid?
tomorrow.
And then now it's like registered forever and ever as, you're putting something stupid. In our reality, no one knows today. Like, I know because, like, I know she was the PE last year. No one knows.
No, thank you. That's totally a typo. Thank you so much.
Hey, you guys want to come over so we can start early?
It works better in video, like one of the later videos, lights are on, like, no, not so, I know doing, anatomy physiology. It takes so long to yeah, it takes so long to practice those videos and upload them that, like, I was trying to do all classes on my day. I put it on my page. I put a link that goes to the. If you just look at my name, should be there, and it has a face on it. Okay, perfect. Yeah, if not, just look at the Facebook page. Thank you.
They always are disappearing.
Yeah.
I think I have one in my office.
Oh, it's right there? Good. Thank you. Yeah, this morning I want to watch one of the videos, and you can't see the screen.
Oh, really?